And you wouldn't like that, would you?
Channel podcast. This is Foxhound for season 2, episode 1. I'm here today with my good friend Zach Wingard from Wingard Wearables. If you're not familiar with Wingard Wearables, Zach creates various EDC tools, tomahawks, and other with fun devices for self-protection and just general mischief and miscreant behavior. So welcome, Zach. Introduce yourself.
Hola, thank you, Matt. And if you guys hadn't heard of Wingard Wearables, we specialize in everyday carry devices that are unconventional, like just looking to address capability gaps on the market. So, going beyond folding knives and going to, everyday carry tomahawks, and everyday carry spikes of unique geometry, that sort of thing, that act both for self-protection and for utility use. So just packing as much capability in something really light that you can wear on your person comfortably, that's what we're all about. And as long as the design is unique and addresses a new capability, we're always interested. If it's something that's already addressed on the market, and we let the market forces do it, we're not into like competing with other harder working makers and trying to make something cheaper or something like that. We want to just operate on our own space. Very niche, very swimming upstream, because there's no real, if you look at the, blade market, big pie graph, there really isn't a sliver in that pie for everyday carry tomahawks. We kind of had to make that niche for ourselves. So that's a little quick intro for that. I guess behind me is the Pennsylvania sky. We're in Southeast Pennsylvania, about 50 minutes outside of the shithole that is Philly. Earlier, I guess it was 2020, they had like 40 bombs go off in a night. It was like someone had rigged up black powder pipe bombs to blow up ATMs. So we always get spicy stuff, but we're in rural Pennsylvania. Like it's like a 50-minute drive. Like it's boring as hell out here. So it's good to have a peaceful environment, wildlife and everything around us, but we don't really have like a martial arts dojo near here. We're like, more likely to run into Amish on a carriage than we are like running into martial arts community. So, getting to know Matt here has been really helpful.
Yeah, just really quick to, people that are not familiar with our relationship. We got hooked up in, was it 2020 or 2021? I think it was
2020.
Yeah, it was 2020 when I was out in California. You reached out to me as knowing that I was somebody who messed with tomahawks in some of my sparring and Dog Brothers fights and stuff like that, and that I trained with them, and that I was sort of into the reality side of tomahawk as well, as opposed to just sort of the showy. I love no shade on Doug Marcaida or any of those guys, but when you watch some of the famous guys doing tomahawk flows, like that's not how axe works. And there's a lot of axes out there on the market, but most of them are either some sort of a modified camp axe, or the drop through style of tomahawk. But it's a big, heavy. It's more like a one-handed early medieval axe than anything else. Or you've got a tool that's meant for breaking stuff that you could fight with, but like you said, there's not really a niche for that EDC tomahawk. So when you reached out to me, and I think the first thing that you sent me was the trainer for the back ripper, and I started messing with it, I was like, oh, this is really well thought out. This guy's gotten, he's done his research. And so, we moved on to the Empress stuff from there. And, I think we've done a pretty good job so far in exploring some of the capabilities and messing with the carry system and stuff like that. But when people think of axes and tomahawks, I think they picture something pretty heavy. You do not do that.
No, there's like a big capability gap. I'll use that term. That's like I've been in Department of Defense employee for a while, and they like using words like capability gap, and actually try to put metrics on things that are really hard to define. But when you look at tomahawks on the market back in 2016, when the ideas were in my head to make a practical everyday carry tomahawk, they were all over a pound, well over a pound in weight. Most of them were pushing north of 20 ounces to 30 ounces. And when you look at the battle-proven weapons of the past, like this is a 23-ounce war club. Like, if I'm going to burden myself with a 23-ounce weapon, is it going to be an $800 full tang tomahawk that's this big, or is it going to be this, which not only could clobber the crap out of somebody, they actually use these against horses, bison, and even bears. It's 30 inches long. I mean, it's packing way more capability, but it weighs 23 ounces and it's huge, you know? So you look at like when people had to depend on these tools every day back in like the 1700s, 1800s, when like your firearm technology was super unreliable and most of the time your gun just couldn't shoot. Well, the tomahawks they used back then, I did a lot of research into them, and they were weighing on the order of like 6 ounces to well under a pound. Like, some of them push 13 ounces. Rarely did you see a tomahawk where the head and handle all together weighed over a pound and was used back in like the Eastern Woodlands era, not horseback fighting, but on your feet in dense woodlands or fighting inside confined spaces of those, cabin structures. These tomahawks were, 10.5 inches up to 19 inches long, and they weighed just really, really very low. Handle a lot more like a knife than a hatchet, and just lightning fast. So when I saw that capability gap there, I also noticed a lot of designs, a lot of diverse designs back then. Everything was hand forged on the frontier. Like most people think, well, the tomahawks just were imported from Europe. Well, a lot of designs were, like the plain hammer pole or pipe tomahawks. But the most diverse designs out there were the spike tomahawks. They were all hand forged from scrap on the frontier, and they came in all kinds of shapes and sizes. And you really can't, the combative capability is all lost. That knowledge is all gone. Their history was an oral history, and a lot of the people on the frontier, even the white people that their progeny survived, were illiterate and didn't really write down how these things were used. But when you hold them in your hand and it weighs less than your smartphone and it's lightning fast, and the shapes and sizes of these things, you start to figure out, well, these things are clearly different from the full tang 30-ounce breaching tool tomahawk. So we got to like dig deeper on that. We're exploring the design space. We're not done, but we have the back ripper tomahawk was the first tomahawk that we came out with, which for folks that hadn't heard of us before, one of the things that we did with these is had them curved to conform to your waistline, either right or left side. And that was our first design that came out. And after that was the Empress tomahawk. And just last year, we came out with the Stingray tomahawk. And each one of these are inspired by historic designs, but they aren't copies. They aren't like reproductions. There are interpretation adapted to modern reality.
Right, so you're not taking an antique example and remaking it.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. Like, this was made by my mentor who's since passed away. This is a spontoon pipe tomahawk. You can smoke this bad boy. But it was based on a museum piece, and it is not as awesome as it is. And I wish I could carry it. I would get a lot of weird looks if I carried this thing. And that's the reality, is our culture has changed. Like, it used to be in the 1600s up through even the late 1800s, in some cases early 1900s, you could openly carry a lot of stuff depending on the area you were in. You could openly carry something like this. It would be awesome to do that. But we're in much less fun times. People will get all kinds of bent out of shape. Like, even though weapons can be comfortably worn, like a sword or a big Bowie knife, they're just not concealable, and you got to be concealable in low vis. And they also don't really translate to today. Like, we sit on our ass more than any other civilization ever has. Like, back then you were walking around, or you're squatting, or you're riding on a horse. You could have a big sword with a scabbard coming out. You can't do that in a modern butt cupping car seat. Your ass is like completely supported. You're all in a safety zone. You got side airbags, front airbags. And that's where things like curving the spike to conform to your waistline helps when you're planting into furniture that you're sitting in. So that's the kind of thing that we take is like, okay, these things were battle proven then. They can be practical for everyday carry today if they're adapted to it.
Yeah, I mean, having worn an Empress Tomahawk either in my pants or inside of my vest when I'm out in the woods, it does conform to the body really well, and it does work really well with our modern lifestyle, because as you were saying, anything, it doesn't even have to be a big sword. Like, I have about a 5-inch knife that sometimes when I'm working outside I'll wear, and if I go pick up lunch or whatever and I get in the car, I have it on my belt, and I have to adjust it. I have to do stuff. But the way that the Empress sits in there, particularly with your carrying system, your carrying and retention system is great. It's easy to deal with. The other thing, generally the way that I carry mine, because I have it with me every day, is I have a backpack with me most of the time, and I have a laptop sleeve within the backpack, and there's like a strap in there. So I strap it inside the laptop, and it's easily drawn with one hand. Or I'm sorry, I strap it inside the laptop compartment. It's easily drawn with one hand. And one of the things that I always think of is, I wouldn't necessarily be using this in a general altercation. So the way that I have it set up is I could swing the backpack onto one arm to use as, some sort of a shield, and I could draw the tomahawk from there, so that I would be able to use the shield to
push them away,
and the tomahawk to cycle through. But having, you've seen some of my sparring videos with these things. It's a quick weapon. Like you said, it handles more at knife range than at what you'd think of as long axe range. I've done a lot of sparring with the cold steel axes, and that's a lot more akin to a medieval size axe than really, some of the historical examples that you've shown me have really opened my eyes to what was being used in, colonial or pre-revolutionary times, especially in the Northeast. We have our kind of misconceptions, I think, from media about those sorts of things. And then not just media, but what's been on the market. I mean, in sort of the modern times, the tomahawk reemerged in Vietnam era, more or less, you know what I mean? And so that's sort of the Lagana blueprint set the sort of military tomahawk path, and then more or less cold steel set the path for the wooden handle drop through head kind of thing. So
and it seems like it falls into two camps, where you got people that use those wooden handled cold steel tomahawks. Some people use them for bushcraft, but a lot of them use them for recreation, just throwing out a wooden target, like at a rendezvous or like a reenactor type thing. Even when those tomahawks aren't necessarily historically accurate, they're cheap fun. They're good fun. I've owned most of their models, and they're cheap enough that you can aggressively modify them and actually do some get them down to practical weight if you put the time into them. Like, a lot of work that takes to get them down to like 12 ounces or 8 ounces.
A lot of material off of those heads to get them down to.
I've done it. It sucks. But it is affordable, though. It just costs you time if you got the tools.
Cool. I have two of them sitting on my table over there. I have one, full length double-handed Viking axe, and one shorter one that it's on its third handle now, or it'll be on its third handle when I replace it, and it's from throwing. But that's part of the beauty of those is, the handles are disposable, man. They're like $10. You can quickly cut them down to whatever size you want, sand them up, carve them if you want. That was Kaju Dog made me a really beautiful one. I didn't want to use it. And he was like, "No, man, throw it till it breaks." Yeah. So we got a lot of throws in. That actually is another interesting part. So you haven't just researched the physical aspects and the dimensions and the weight and stuff of the tomahawks. You've done some research on actual use. As much as you can of the first person sources. And, some of the things that you've shared with me that you've found have really made me go, huh. And anybody who's seen The Patriot assumes that, people were dual wielding a knife and a tomahawk and there was some complicated choreography. And that doesn't seem to be exactly what you've found.
No, and I think Matt Easton did a great couple of videos where he looked at accounts from, I think it was British newspapers, which, I mean, if you watch his videos, I think it's like almost 2 hours of him talking through these accounts. Obviously, the news can be as fake back then as it is now. But, they really, it covers a lot. But the stuff I've looked at, I never thought of looking at the British newspapers, but I looked at a lot of the county histories, like Google Books has digitized a lot of this stuff. Some of your viewers may be familiar with Macklemore's Tomahawk fighting books. Like he wrote those, I think he first published those in like 2000. And he tried to look at, I never interviewed the man, he's passed away. Always did want to reach out to him, but I didn't before he died, I think last year. But, they did not digitize many books back then, like in the early 90s or late 90s when he was doing that research. Like he didn't have that much material to look at, and he did sort of the Magua Patriot fight choreography where you got this big tomahawk and this big long knife and ice pick grip, and you're doing this flowing, and there's none of that. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means there's an absence of it in the accounts. It seems like the knife and the tomahawk were very important together. They were used together, but not at the same time. You use the tomahawk either to throw and incapacitate as you closed in. And often when I first started doing this, design the back ripper even, I did not realize how much they threw these things in combat till I started reading the accounts. I thought that throws were done like if someone was running away from you in a raid and they were getting away, why not throw it? You got other guys, your battle buddies in your raid squad, you can borrow one of their tomahawks if you lose it, right? But no, as I read deeper, they were often thrown at first opportunity, and then you would transition to either the fixed blade knife, or you would have even other tomahawks or war clubs on you. You would carry several close quarter weapons. So throwing one, at an enemy that, according to the accounts, could even be 20 paces away. That sounds insane to me. It's like 75 feet.
Yeah,
but that's what they were saying in these accounts. It's like, wow, that's a huge distance. But if you've been throwing them since you were a little kid, at trees all the time, maybe they did get that good. Maybe it was an exaggeration, right? But if you see that pop up a bunch, maybe it's fake news going around, but clearly they did throw them certainly within a range that would surprise people. And they would use them more often than throwing as close quarters, chopping and tear down weapons. Like they don't get into a lot of details, but it's clear that these were used primarily to chop the head, or to tear an opponent down to ground and then finish them off. And so they were primary close quarters weapons because, well, your firearm was often inoperable. But it seems like there was not dual wielding. There's also no account of choking up on the grip and gripping it under the head. There's even evidence that kind of counters whether that was done. A lot of the tomahawks had lanyard holes, or there are even examples of all metal tomahawks, not full tang, but basically hand forged like a fire poker. And they would be so thin from the handle section to the axe that like you're not going to choke up and grab like a 3/8 diameter rod to punch somebody. right? So it seems pretty clear that there's a lack of evidence of dual wielding. There's a lack of evidence of sliding around your hands on grips for like a fist grip.
Right.
And when you hold these things to see how fast they are, it kind of makes sense why you wouldn't bother to do that, because they're nimble enough. And if they got a spike on them, you can transition to even nastier things if an opponent gets within your chopping arc. So, you know, when it's sort of a holistic thing of reviewing all these sources, seeing what was missing, and then holding some accurate reproductions that led me to believe that, you know, maybe they just gripped them as firm as they could here,
Right.
did the best they could. And if there was an opportunity to throw them, they would. And if, you know, someone got close, they had a lot of nasty options to make life very bad for them, very short and nasty. So that's what I picked up on. Did I miss anything that you remember surprised you?
No, that was the number one, the throwing aspect. You know, when you first brought it up, and I was like, "Oh, really?" And then the more I thought about it, I was like, "Oh, yeah," because I've thrown a lot of cold steel axes, like I was saying before. And you don't want to get hit with one of those. Like, it's a problem. And actually, when I first got a hold of the trainer, occasionally in a Dog Brothers gathering, we'll do a melee fight at the end. So I got a trainer for the Empress Tomahawk, and it's not very big, right? So in a melee, I like a buckler and a stick. So I took the buckler on my hand, and I held the tomahawk in there while we were all lining up. And, I kind of picked the guy that I was going to run at. And as soon as the fight started, I tucked my stick, pulled this and threw it and closed the distance. And, you know, when you only have to close 10 quick steps at a dead run, and you can open with a throw and use it to keep the, to cover that distance as you're breaking in. He said to me after, he goes, "What the fuck did you throw at me?" And I was like, I threw a tomahawk at you. It hit him. It didn't, obviously it was a plastic, or poly or whatever Volpez uses for his training.
And he was wearing protection.
It wouldn't matter. Even though this is only, what are these, eight, these ones are 8 ounces, somewhere around there.
Something like that. Yeah.
In a half a pound, it would not feel good to catch. This is fire hardened hickory, right? Like, yeah.
I mean, baseball's what? But baseball's 5.5 ounces. People get knocked cold with a baseball thrown at you.
And the baseball doesn't have the rotational inertia that something like this has. So even if it's just a distraction, or you bury this directly at someone's face or chest, it's really gonna, be disruptive. Sort of speaking to the choking up thing, as soon as I got one of these in my hands, I was like, well, you can't choke up with this. The blade is here and here. It's not going to work. But I think that Macklemore actually had something to do with how popular that idea became, because that's in his books, where he would choke up, and he was actually using, at times the haft to block and things like that while engaging the Bowie.
Hey, you know what? To me, that is perfectly valid for if you had to fight with a cold steel tomahawk that was heavy and had the taper drop through the hop handle. That's not to criticize it. It's just that it wasn't historical. Yeah, it totally seems valid to me. Like if I had the Norse Hawk, by cold steel, and I had to fight with it, I would probably use his techniques. It makes sense because it's a heavy, sluggish tomahawk that can't be nimble. It probably is faster just to drop it down to fist load and tear into people. But that's not how heavy historic ones were.
He clearly used knowledge when he put that stuff together. And it's, similarly, like, I don't want to say anything negative about like the Kitchita guys or anything like that, but there's some, the recreationism that some guys get into isn't necessarily really recreating. There's some, there's a lot of Filipino martial arts influence. I like when people take that Filipino martial arts influence and think about how to make it work with other weapons, because, it's not all agricultural, which is what that's for. Um, but when it comes to something like, you know, an Empress Tomahawk or even a Cold Steel Tomahawk, you do need to go with, you know, as we've kind of talked about, yeah, a lot of the time form follows function, but in other cases, when you're either recreating or creating from new, function needs to follow form, right? So that's something that we've kind of begun to dive deeply into creating a combatives course, starting for this axe, but you know, maybe continuing down the line for each of the aspects of the different axes. Your Stingray is not going to behave the same way as the Empress. You know, now I've got some trainers for each of the different types, and I've moved around a little bit, and the things, the structure, the physical stance and everything that work with the Empress aren't exactly going to be what you do with the Stingray. There's different pluses, minuses, different weaknesses, different strengths. So as you think about it, but one of the other things that I thought was really interesting about the weight and the fact that they were willing to throw their tomahawks was the fact that a guy would maybe be carrying either multiple tomahawks or a tomahawk and a couple of war clubs or several knives or something like that. It's people that play video games and you know, are into fantasy. They kind of sort of focus on the loadout of their character, where, oh, you know, your character's got a spear on his back, and he's also got a sword, and he's also got a this and a that, and all these things. And you're like, that's something Matt Easton. For people that aren't familiar with who we're talking about, Matt Easton is Scala Gladiatoria. He's one of my Holy Grail interviewees. I'm hoping to get him some because I'd really like to talk to that guy. But you know, Matt Easton or Shadiversity or Scalagrim, those guys have addressed many times that you wouldn't be carrying that much shit. Like, it would be heavy, you know. A longsword's a couple pounds. You know, a spear is really unwieldy to carry anyway, other than just in your hands. You know, a big kite shield, good luck with that on your back for a long time. You know what I mean? Like, walking around, you do that. But if you had, you know, 2 or 3 of these that only weigh a half a pound, you know, in different positions on your body, throwing 1 or 2 of them, you know, to cover the distance or keep the distance would be not a problem at all. I don't think. I think it would be fairly easy.
And existing wearing them is not a problem. Like right now, I got the Stingray, my personal Stingray, under my arm.
There you go.
I actually took my back ripper that I was wearing on my pants out, but you know, it is practical to not just use these, but to have them on you available for use. Yeah. You know, 2 tomahawks, 3 tomahawks, 4 is a little tough. I've done 3. I've actually fallen asleep wearing 2. No problem. You know, you take naps with them. But yeah, you know, there's a lot of evidence that they were thrown. They weren't always thrown, but there's a whole lot of evidence that was a big thing in the Northeast. You go out west, you know, the tomahawks got a lot bigger, and actually the tomahawks did not take over the war clubs when you got into the plains warfare, because this thing is like 30 inches and you actually don't want to sink a blade into an opponent as you're riding by. Right. So actually war clubs stayed strong, but the tomahawks that were used back then on horseback did get a bit bigger. You started to look at things that started to approach the dimensions of what you see Cold Steel selling. In the age of photography, you had all these Native Americans holding these big tomahawks. Well, that was really late period. Like the Iroquois and a lot, you know, the Delaware had all been pushed out of the Northeast long ago by the time photographs started to get taken like that.
Do you think
completely different context?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. A horseman's weapon needs to be longer anyway. Do you think though some of that comes from like some of the fact that the war clubs stayed more prominent than like a bladed tomahawk has to do with, I mean, I guess number one, they're not in the woods anymore on the plains. So an axe isn't necessarily as everyday carry of an item as it would be, but also that pre-colonial or early colonial times, pre-revolutionary times, before the real migration of the settlers across the plains, there was more allying with the native tribes, from the British and the French, where those trade axes were given in a little bit more of good faith. Whereas by the time the white people were expanding across the plains, you were kind of keeping what you had, or stealing.
There was still a ton. There was still a ton of trade, though. I mean, you look at like Battle of Little Bighorn. They had better rapid fire firearms than the U.S. Army did. The U.S. Army was still using single shot guns, and some of those natives were using, lever actions. So they could still access them, but some of these war clubs, there was a traditional aspect, there was a status aspect. It's true that you did not have to trade to get these. These were natural materials, but there's a potent advantage. They had greater reach. In the context of horseback combatives, you're going to have one shot to lay on a target. You don't want to get stuck. I mean, it makes sense. And a lot of them were made with trade materials, like the big gun stock war clubs, where they would stick multiple knife blades into them. Those knives were actually pretty expensive by the time they logistically got a trade knife out there. Some of those knives were worth a horse, depending on where you were at. So it's interesting to see. So I do think, but it's a change in context when you're talking about like confined space of the woods. Even something as big as this is 20 inches. It's still pretty maneuverable in the woods. And actually, I think this one was based off of a find from out east anyway. But most of them were, 15 inches or less. And you can carry multiples. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, one of my fellow dog brothers, Gong Fu Dog, is also known as Bladecraft Method, and he loves throwing stuff, and he's very, very big on telling people that you're not throwing away your weapon. You're using it. He always says to either close the distance or to keep the distance. Throwing a knife is a little different. Frankly, throwing a knife is harder than throwing an axe. I've thrown a lot of both, and I stick much more often with an axe. It's just
you got more momentum if you don't stick. If you hit handle first, especially on something like this.
Yeah, when you hit handle first, I know. Same with this thing. I mean, when you hit handle first, you get a good chance of a stick, as well as just the hard wood hitting somebody. It doesn't feel good with that kind of behind it. So it's interesting though, because you're taking this modern take on the primitive, right? So we're looking at something like the Empress Tomahawk or the Stingray, and you're optimizing them for concealed carry, for everyday use. We've talked a bit about the different scenarios that such a thing might be useful, but you use old school techniques, old school materials. I mean, it's hard to describe to somebody who's never handled one of these, but when I bring mine around, anytime I'm around my weapons friends, I'm like, hey guys, check this out. And people are like, what is that? And even when some guys have handled the trainers, but I just had the New York clan of the Dog Brothers just came and visited the Boston clan for this past weekend, and they came to my house, and I was showing them on the Bob some of, with the live Tomahawk, just kind of some of the ideas and concepts that we were using, and they immediately so everybody wants to hold it. And when they did, they were like, this doesn't feel like a manufactured, if you get a cold steel, it's a drop forged head or whatever, and it's these machine lathed handles, and you can customize them up however you want. But with something like this, you're like, oh, this is already what I want. You know what I mean? The effort.
Yeah, it's kind of like something has. One of my customers told me this. It was like it has soul, And maybe a hard word that means different things to different people, but there are lots of really high quality tomahawks that are machined. I like that Loki has joined us, by the way.
He didn't being left out of the
So like
conversation.
if you hold like an RMJ full tang tomahawk or a Winkler, you can tell this is expensive because you see how it's machined,
Right.
but it feels and looks like a machined item.
Right.
And if you hold a cold steel or a SOG tomahawk, you can feel why it's cheap. It feels like a toddler in Taiwan put it together on a machine, and it worked. All those things work. The way I put things together, I have no problem with embracing machines and modern methods. All our hickory handles are CNC machined hickory, right? But I was mentored by my mentor has passed away, but Jack Vargo. He wrote the book on spike tomahawks. He was a archaeologist and a traditional blacksmith in upstate New York, in a region where the Iroquois were in strong influence. And so he taught me a lot. I mean, he spent hours and hours and hours on the phone mentoring me about the traditional techniques. And so I do not hand forge my tomahawks. I don't even have all hand forged tomahawks. Like the back ripper is hand forged by a blacksmith we work with in North Carolina. The Empress is cast from high strength silicon bronze. The Stingray, cast from 5160, right? But all of them are hung on Pennsylvania hickory handles. They're used with wedges from using the same wood as the handle, so there's no mismatch in the natural expansion and shrinkage between the wood handle and the wedge. So we've applied those lessons. And we go for an aesthetic, because I think if you have a weapon you're wearing on you as a sidearm that you are going to depend on for your life, it needs to be more than just functional. It needs to look good. You look at these museum pieces of traditional tomahawks. Some of them were crude, but a lot of them look amazing. You go to like medieval Europe, like they had fancy daggers and things that looked incredible. Granted, those were openly worn as like status symbols, but even if you kept that concealed, you would have some pride in it,
Right.
And so we want to impart that on all of our weapons. Even simple things that aren't tomahawks, like the quill or one of our other spikes, the dick pick. You can't see it on details on camera, but when you look up close, you can see the hand file marks on these things. You can see the manual labor that went into it. And we don't use manual labor just for fun. We try to take as many shortcuts as modern machines can provide to minimize our time and our labor costs. But in the end, these designs do require an awful lot of hand fitting and attention to detail. And so, yeah, they do have soul, and they are not cheap. That's the problem with that, is that they are high value, but they are available.
Right.
Shameless plug.
Well, nothing that has real value is cheap. And with the amount of, I happen to have a lot of knowledge just from talking to you on Sundays, and it's like, I'm in the shop today, I'm hand scraping 100 handles or something like that. If there's a voice in the background, don't worry about it. You really put your heart and soul and the cliche, the blood, sweat, and tears into creating these things, and you can feel it when people talk about weapons that or items that feel alive. And that's something that I immediately, when I got a hold of, even the training. You had sent me one of the original trainers of the back ripper tomahawk. That's basically the price, and like it costs you the same to create as the actual tomahawk, because it was the same materials. I think what's the difference? Like the head's not hardened or something.
Yeah, and it doesn't have an edge, so just cave your skull in instead of split it.
Well, I was gonna say, I feel like I could pretty quickly put an edge on that thing with a heavy file and use it as an axe. As a tomahawk, if you had to. Even that felt extremely alive. But as soon as I got the Empress tomahawk in my hand, and I could feel the soul, for lack of a better word, that's that exists in it. And it's like, it's the difference between handling a proper sword and a machete.
Mm-hmm.
A machete is useful. And, you know, as a Filipino martial artist, a slightly curved, single-edged, you know, 25-inch blade or whatever, like, oh yeah, that does everything I need it to do. But then when you get an actual sword, you know, I have a sword that was made in the Philippines. You get that into your hand, you go, okay, this is different.
Mm-hmm.
Or same thing that, you know, you buy a mall wall hanger katana, a sword-like object. You're like, well, this kind of feels like a sword. But then you get an antique sword into your hand, whether it's Eastern or Western, you go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is the thing they're trying to do. And you know, you've modernized some aspects of it, but I got this in my hand. I went, oh, this is the thing that we've been trying to replicate. It's hard to replicate items from earlier European history that had a wooden handle, because wood doesn't last. You know, a wooden axe from you know, 1100 isn't a wooden axe.
Very rare to find those. Yeah.
Almost impossible. You know, maybe you get a grave find where you get a head that's barely intact and you can infer some things, but yeah, you really get a feel for the connection of man and weapon when you come to something like this. And it's, you know, for a weapons-based martial artist, it's a real treat to get something in my hands like that, and then to be able to start to go, okay, well, you know, how would we use this thing? Throwing, oh yeah, for sure. Yep, 100%. But then, you know, our explorations of how does this work around the human body? That's a huge thing. It's how does it work around the human body? My own body as the user, my opponent's body. The Empress Tomahawk is going to behave differently from the back ripper, is going to behave differently from the Stingray, is going to behave differently from a cold steel. You know, it's just the way that it goes with that sort of thing. But yeah, I really like, I harp on the aliveness of one of these weapons. And then the other half of what you're talking about, where you're talking about the aesthetics of it, you know, it's a beautiful handmade weapon. The Empress is clearly, you know, it's dark compared to it as far as I kind of see it, I think that this is the most modern EDC of the three. So it makes sense. It's that kind of like tactical black, but it's tough to see in the light that I've got going here. But you can see the patina is really worn off between using it and going in and out of the sheath, and you're starting to see the bronze of the head and stuff like that. So there's a real beauty as it wears in that you get to it. And, you know, even just some small spots on mine where the stain has gotten a little chipped from throwing it around, or it brings the character and the life out a little bit more. But historically, that's always been the case. You know, your weapon, now we exist in a society where our weapons aren't supposed to be seen. So, you know, typically it's concealed or in the pocket or whatever. But I particularly now kind of will use my sheath as being the thing that lets people kind of see what's, you know, what I've got. So like I carry a CRKT Obake a lot of the time. It's a great little, you know, it's it gives you a fixed blade. And I went to Josh at Offensive Industries and I said, I need a deep carry sheath for one of these so that it's not out in the open. But, you know, I picked a cool pattern. I want people that if I hand it to somebody, I pull out the whole sheath and the whole knife, they go, oh, that's pretty cool, man. Like, you know, there is a pride that comes about your weapon, and there is a you know, a sense of status. And when it comes to gun guys, you know, in our society, tactical and low profile and whatever is sort of the way. But when you go, as soon as you get out of the United States, you got gold plated everything. You want to go down to Mexico And you got guys with gold, chrome, you know, especially if they're a higher status individual. Obviously, you know, if it's your if you're a down in the trenches individual, you're not going to bother with all that. But if you're a higher status person who's going to be carrying a weapon, yeah, you're going to bling that thing out, man. Like you're gonna make that a something that when people see it, they're like, oh, whoever owns that, that's an important guy.
Yeah, it's a status symbol, you know, for their whatever hierarchical structure that their organization is in.
Exactly.
And we have less of that here. We do have some of that. I guess you see like the Gucci gun flex thing where, you know, you buy nods, like that's your status symbols. You spent like however much money on night vision goggles, you know, or whatever, you know. And there's nothing wrong with that. I wish I had night vision goggles. But yeah, you know, for us, you know, that one of the things, yeah, you can't carry them. You carry a flashlight, you know, but for us, it's like on the design process, one of the things that we want to do is not only go for the aesthetics, but try to make it as timeless as possible. Like for the Empress, like I could see this on a Bronze Age battlefield, some Greek soldier pulling this out. I could see this in Darth Vader's hands if lightsaber technology didn't exist, you know? And we try to do that with all our designs. And that means we take a long time to design. It's like, I think the Empress was like, the concept took 3 years until we had a product line, you know? And part of that's like, okay, I have a full-time job. I'm doing this part-time and doing all the stuff with business. But even then, like Stingray, this was like August 2019, and we didn't get the first product line launched until fall of 2021, you know? So that was like a 2-year process. So, you know, we're never going to have a bunch of products coming out, you know, like, because we're in a big company, we're like a nano size company. My workshop's like 8 by 12 feet. But there's so much more to do with tomahawks. Like we've done 3 tomahawk designs, you know, Back Ripper, Empress, and Stingray, but we've got roadmapped a lot more. We're eventually going to have a smokable EDC tomahawk. We're going to call it the Lung Ripper. You can be able to smoke cannabis with it or tobacco. We're going to have other versions of spiked tomahawks that are not going to look anything like what's on the market. So I'm excited about it. I've always loved tomahawks. I think the future for tomahawks is bright. We don't try to follow trends or fads. I don't think tomahawks are going to become a trend, unfortunately. I think you got to be kind of a special person to be like, yeah, I'm going to carry a tomahawk for my EDC, or even have it near me, whether it's like bedside table or in a backpack. That's not many people. And we're okay with that. We're okay with that niche. It's a slow grow for a company, but we're happy. And we really love our customers for it. And we're very happy they're patient with us, because the Lung Ripper is going to take a long ass time. That's the most complicated tomahawk ever, a smokable tomahawk where the handle's still strong, can't break. And swapping between 2 different combustibles, you know, cannabis and tobacco, like, you know, I don't smoke. You know, I got to research all that. I'm an engineer. I'm not a good one, but I know enough that I got to talk to the users, you know, to make sure this stuff works. Just like I'm also not, you know, killing people with tomahawks, right? I'm an engineer designing them. I talk to people like, you know, you who have, or one of the few who even spars with tomahawks. Very few people even do that. But, you know, my take on it as a weapon designer is, you know, yeah, having practical firsthand knowledge is good, but these are very rare situations. And like John Garand was not a gunfighter. You know, John Browning did not mow people down with belt-fed machine guns before he designed one. You know, sometimes when you design something that's new or something that's old but brought back and new in other aspects, you're not going to be the guy who has like a lot of experience on the user side for something that hasn't existed in a long time. But you just got to reach out to people and talk to them and get their feedback and just get those design juices going. So I'm really happy with how it's going. And I just think the future is going to be really bright. I don't know. That's
Yeah.
just my take on it. I'm very, very excited.
For sure. Well, I have to say, I kind of mentioned before, everybody that I've put this, the Empress in their hand has been like, oh yeah. But interestingly, the couple of guys that I've sparred with Empress versus Empress, when the fencing masks come off, the eyes are like this big, and like that would have been really bad. Like, oh boy. The likelihood of an Empress versus Empress duel is very small, because you'd have to have two customers that really were angry enough to get
I would be a rich man if that happened. If I sold so many Empresses that like Congress was like, we need to ban these tomahawks people are carrying, I would already be like piles of money. I'd be Scrooge McDuck swimming in it, because like we've sold not many. But yeah, the probability of Empress versus Empress, keep going.
The preferred weapon of the American judicial duel, after our current period, that's probably going to collapse.
Yeah, when we're in the second age of America, when people are like cooking a rat over a fire, that's like your standard dinner.
Yeah,
and yeah, maybe everyday carry tomahawks will be something,
But what we've discussed and what we've sort of played with these is that this is big knife range, or actually it's closer to it's medium knife range. We're not into quite Bowie, however.
Yeah, these are like 12 to 16 inches, Yeah,
something this long, exactly. This is around the size of a K-bar. I don't know where mine's tucked under my pillow, because don't break into my house. But you're at that similar range, but you've just got a different, number one, it's a different idiom of movement. But number two, at knife range, this is packing a punch and a level of devastation that is almost unsettling. I mean, as someone who I've been on hand for a knife assault that was nearly fatal with a large knife, as well as just it's my area of interest. So I've seen tons of video, tons of photographs of after effects and stuff like that. I mean, and I've taken this to meet. If I had to choose in a one-on-one scenario against a person with a larger knife, like a K-bar size, I would want something like this, because there's a few aspects to an axe. Number one, it concentrates the force on the head. The head is slightly beyond your hand, so when you come in for strikes, you've got a lot of power and things like that. Obviously, you've got the hook, which I will say, one of the targets that we quickly started, or one of the sort of ideas that we quickly started working with the Empress particularly, was catching the hand, your opponent's hand, or tomahawk. When you're sort of at long fighting range, there's a lot of pecking. It's a lot of quick cuts to the hand, particularly. Getting this slammed into your hand would be an immediate problem. You are not going to be holding anything anymore. But utilizing the talon portion to capture and pull, or to hook on, if you miss the thumb, number one, if you catch the thumb, this is coming off.
Yeah.
If it's not coming off, it's winding up in such a way that it's not usable anymore. And if you miss, you're catching onto your opponent's weapon. Perhaps, with a knife, with a K-bar or something, it might slide off. But when oriented in a forward way, this curve slides in. When I do this, it's scoopy, right? So you can catch along the sort of slope of the thumb, even if I'm gripping a knife like this, and this is going to make a mess. And in Libre fighting, I don't know, weirdly, I do not have a knife to hand. Like, my closest knife is on the table over there. It's
I
like,
don't have a knife on me either, but you know,
I almost
axes
always
and war clubs everywhere.
right. In Libre fighting, the preferred grip is reverse grip edge in. And, you know, that is the trendy knife grip right now. But there's some specific reasons why. And a lot of it has to do with the pull cutting aspects. And when you've entangled with an opponent, if you've clashed forearm to forearm, pulling down and out is going to be your most powerful way to retract your weapon. And anything in the way is going to get wrecked. Well, that works with this too. So a lot of I've started, especially through, you know, sparring and close quarter sparring. I've begun to play with those aspects and sort of consider the horror show that would happen if you wound up in a blender with this. The blender is sort of the Libre fighting sparring methodology, and if you were in a true blender with something like this, you'd make a pretty good mess of your opponents. And you know, the power and the ability to transition between you know, the sort of sharp tooth and the sort of talon aspects of this weapon. There's a lot of it that still is open for exploration, but I've been pretty impressed with it so far. I haven't used it on a live human because that's not all that ethical. And if I had, I wouldn't be talking about it here right now.
Good. Yeah.
We'd maybe discuss that off record later, but yeah, it's the aspects and the attributes of the Empress, particularly from my own use or my own, you know, playings, have really turned me to seeing what you guys are turning out.
Yeah, and I think part of that too is like we've talked mostly about, like, I guess we're getting deep into the like human on human combatives, but you know, I also see like animal being a thing too. Like one of our only customer who has had to take a life got badly mauled by a dog, got 72 stitches to put his nose back into his skull, pulled his cartilage out of his nasal socket, it ripped the side of his neck open. And he did not have a tomahawk on him. He had the dick pick, but you know, he used that 7 to 8 thrust in the dog's rib cage and the dog died. But a tomahawk would have resolved that faster. And if he had not been the one attacked, if someone else had been attacked, you know, having that hook to be able to pull or being able to target like along the spine, the ridge of the spine on so many animals that are capable of injuring a child or an adult human, whether it's a dog or a bear, the central nervous system has to get really close to you for it to damage you. It's biting you, or if you're the third party who responds to it, it's biting someone else. There's an awful lot of spine that you can work with. And a fixed blade or a spike, although it was great that he had the dick pick on him, and it, you know, played a role in saving his life, thrust against an animal that is trying to kill a person is a time game. And, you know, he did 7 to 8 jabs to the ribs and the dog let go of him. It did not drop that. It knew it was like, oh, I'm screwed, let go, and sort of ran off and died. But if it had been more determined, you know, it could have continued to damage him. So I think that's where you get, you know, the real benefit of the tomahawk is that ability in the chop to split through flesh and bone reliably and get here or with an animal along the spine, or use that spike to pull or drag. And it, you know, I've had a few customers have to pull their tomahawks against, you know, an aggressive human who got the hell out of there because they saw like, oh, geez, I don't want to get a tomahawk. You know, an animal will not care. No. Most animals will not. Like none of our customers have been, you know, attacked by like a black bear or something, but a black bear or a dog will not care if you're waving a little thing. No. And yet you need that sort of, and that gets back to what we're focused on, just something that weighs very little, whole lot of capability. And so, yeah, I don't really know how to ethically train for like animal self-defense. I think that's just something you got to keep in your head. I've definitely met dogs that I didn't like, but never, fortunately, have not been attacked by a dog in a long time.
Yeah.
But that's a reality that is probably a lot more likely for a lot of people than a violent encounter with a human.
Yeah, I've worked with dogs. I've been involved. Actually, my mom was involved in a pretty gnarly dog attack. She was walking her Jack Russell, and these two dogs. It was almost like a coyote maneuver. One of them kind of did a back and forth across her path a few times, and the other one slipped up from behind and grabbed George, old Jack Russell. George lived for a long time after this because he was mean. He lived on spite and hatred, like most Jack Russell Terriers.
I was about to say, it sounds like a Jack Russell.
He was just a little, this is full of hate. But the one dog, caught him by his inner thigh. The other one grabbed his neck, and they ripped him open from both ends. And George lived for like a decade after that. Feel bad for him to a degree, but at the same time, my mom was in danger too. Those dogs were focused on taking out George. I'm sure he said like a dog racial slur to them or something because he was that much
to offend them.
He probably coming, I assume. But in that kind of a situation, part of why I was mentioning earlier, I carry this, like when I walk in the woods, I have like a Carhartt vest and I'll clip it inside. So it's not out, but we have a lot of coyotes here. I mean, there's coyotes in every single state in the United States. Probably other than Hawaii, unless some smart ass brought one to Hawaii. They tried to kill it and they just keep breeding. But one interesting thing that has happened with coyotes in this country is they weren't in every state, but we tried to use the same method to cleanse the continent that we did with wolves. And coyotes and wolves aren't the same animal. So when you start to pick off coyotes and they do their roll call at night and their voice is missing, the females go into estrus. So they actually start reproducing more. So now you got these.
I've learned something new. I did not know that. That's fascinating.
Coyote America is the book that you can read all about it. But
I'll have to.
So
we got them here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they were probably where you live, and they were probably where I live already. But they weren't walking through LA, which they are now. They weren't in Central Park, which they are now. I guess they might have been in Central Park where Central Park was originally. But anyway, I'm not afraid of one coyote. The ones around here are like good size, but they're not giant and like whatever. They're not that interested in humans anyway. But if you have a couple of them, they begin to be a problem. And then, if you are walking your pet, if you have a dog or, I don't let Loki doesn't go outside. It's because coyotes account for a lot of cats and small dogs around here. But if I were walking my pet in the woods, I would want something that was capable of bringing a tremendous amount of, force and authority to the situation. But with the Empress particularly, this talon blade, like you were saying, for either attacking the spine or finding, entering into a soft structure, locking into a bony structure, and pulling, removing something. If you had a larger dog and it was being set upon by a coyote or two, being able to sink this in and pull, would be really helpful. That could work against a human being too. If you've ever seen the Dog Brothers Martial Arts has our self-defense anti-knife system, whatever you want to call it, is called Die Less Often. And the DLO tapes start, or at least some of them, they begin and each one contains a lot of surveillance camera footage or TV or police cam from the front of their cars or whatever. And you'll see a knife attack generally a person who is assaulting someone with a knife has gone through some sort of a mental preparation or break or something like that. A normal functioning human being isn't going to do that. It's a really visceral, awful thing to decide you're going to take a life with a knife, where you're the aggressor, where you're like, I'm gonna get you, and I'm gonna use this 3 inches of metal to do it. That is not a mindset that a normal person is in. So a lot of those people are so fixated and tunnel visioned on it that, if someone is sitting on their ex-wife, just stabbing her, you're not going to be able to kick him or punch him or grab him easily. Something like sinking this into someone's trap and pulling them off of another person is definitely within the bounds of what I've considered being a possibility with a weapon. Or I don't know if you're talking about the cyclopsing thing.
Orbital socket would be pretty bad.
That's my I call it cyclopsing. You enter into one orbital socket and just rotate and pull, and now they just have one big orbital socket. Not very nice. Or you could do it from the side and pull.
Yep. Peeling somebody off the other, in a life-threatening situation. That's one of those things where having a gun may be the inappropriate, the ballistic tool may be inappropriate for that application.
Yeah,
I remember seeing
you're not worried about the person that you're using it on. You're worried about either a bystander or the person you're trying to assist. There was a video a couple of years ago of a cop and a suspect. Basically, each of them, it was like they were dancing. It's like one of them had a wrist, it was grabbed on the wrist of the other. And I think the suspect had a knife and the cop had the gun, and they were spinning. Neither could get their weapon in play. And the cop has his backup buddy come up, and he's got his pistol and low ready, seeing these two adults standing and spinning. Right. And he's got the standard modern cop equipment. He's got handgun, which is inappropriate in this situation. He's got taser. He may have mace. None of those were going to stop that situation. Right. A blade would have, whether it had been a knife or a tomahawk or that sort of thing, something that you could close the distance and peel somebody off. The other is trying to kill your partner. And you could just tell, like, he had enough sense not to start blasting, but he was just like, I'm going to stand here and be useless, and it was like, so I get, that gets into the whole guns versus blades and stuff. And clearly guns are here to stay. They're the ultimate, range defensive weapon. But, when they're inaccessible or inoperable or inappropriate, hey, tradition says tomahawk, that's the way to go. To kind of like break from, I could talk about fucking tomahawks all day and axes, because that's one of my areas of interest. You've referenced the dick pic and the quill a couple of times. So you go beyond that traditional idea, and you've got these couple of tools that are way outside. You get the micropike as well, but those are stylized and niche outside of something that's commonly thought of. And I carry a small titanium pick that I usually use for frying stuff. I would go to save your knife. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. But you've got these tools that, particularly I love I like the dick pic for obvious reasons, but I love so my wife came up with that, actually, and it was intended for self-defense for the ladies, and you can either wear it behind the ear or tucked in the bottom of your pocket or that sort of thing. It is a blunt tip spike, and that was a lesson that we applied from traditional spike tomahawks. Like most tomahawks that had straight spikes were actually blunt or chisel tip. They weren't needle tip sharp. And, this is sort of a blunt pyramidal tip, so it doesn't really come with a carry system. And this is not a tip at all. It's sort of a chisel. Right. And so you can
pry staples or pry open things with this, or use this like an awl, that sort of thing. But in self-defense, it's spike for the fist, and is ergonomic in many different ways. And like you were saying, you know, form follows function. Well, function follows form with this. You know, this is one of those things where it started as an idea of like, hey, women's self-defense products were like pink handguns, or drop this GPS off so that they can find your murdered body. It was like terrible stuff for women. And my wife was like, let's come up with something that could be like sort of like wearable weaponized jewelry. And we aren't there yet with it. Actually, it has more to go to be truly a woman's jewelry type product. But you know, once we started homing in on these prototypes, it was like, okay, now you've built it. It could be carried and worn and used and gripped in so many different ways than we initially anticipated it to be. And that's because you are coming up with functions based on this unique form. It's just a unique shape that you don't see around. And it came from that idea of like, hey, let's have something that could be worn behind the ear. And I've concealed carried this buck naked in the shower, not showering in front of people that I had to conceal things from, but I mean, you can conceal carry this, you know, naked if you had to. But the amount of utility applications customers have come up with is incredible. Even though this is entirely, you know, was intended to be spiked to the fist, you know, sticks on in the eye, push them off you, get off me tool type thing. People have been using these more, and I wind up using mine every day for some practical utility purpose that saves my folding knife blade from like getting pried apart or, you know, abusing the edge.
I remember the post with all those SE knives that were missing their tips.
Oh yeah, the tips. Yeah, it's like, oh, you hope those customers used it just for an emergency, but you know they probably didn't. You know, they probably just batoned it into wood and did a little wiggle, and then it was like, but yeah, for us, it's like Wingard Wearables keeps staying in the niche. You got the pie graph of, you know, EDC products and knives, and it's like EDC tomahawks is like, you can't even measure the slice of pie that is. EDC spikes is something that does exist at least, you know, but we are taking a different route on the spikes to make them easier to carry or have more functions. So the dick pick is essentially a long spike with a percussive hammer face and a pry bar, and it can be gripped in a variety of ways as well. But I used to just not care for carrying spikes. I didn't get it until you know, I started observing, you know, people in the Instagram EDC community, and a lot of the spikes they had were like almost like an ice pick, like not a whole lot smaller than a fixed blade knife. You know, some of them even had beefy handles and sheaths, and you know, some of them got really slim. That was good, but the potential of a spike is like, I mean, you can have a really skinny, lightweight carry system that's a whole lot less of a footprint than a fixed blade, so it's easier to wear. But clearly in like Libre and combatives, an edge is going to be better than just a spike. I see these more as like pairing it with your blade to save your blade for some applications like utility. It's kind of like a knife saver, but you know, compared to a folding knife, you know, it's inherently easier to deploy because it's ready to go. Loki's about to visit you back there. He's doing shadow puppets back there. But yeah, we're hopefully down the road, we're going to keep doing the spike thing, but down the road, we are looking to knives and other things. So those are kind of, we're keeping those close to the chest. But it's exciting. It's just boundless, you know, just coming up with new concepts. So
I really like the idea of the quill because it can be you transition through 4 different grips, I think, in the last, few seconds, and just how it could be utilized. And you have multiple sizes too, because no one's hands are the same, right? Like my hands, your hands, a girl's hands, a large man's hands. So the multiple sizes allow those grips and manipulations to happen for almost anybody. But, you know, as soon as you start moving it through the different, like, oh, maybe the long spike is oriented from the top, maybe it's oriented to the bottom. You can conceal it. Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, you can get into boxing kind of applications with it. You can get into more hammer fist applications with it. You can use it, like you said, as like a pushing tool to GTFO. Like there's different. In Dog Brothers, we say we pray to Saint Foom. Saint Foom is an acronym for "Stay the fuck off of me," or "Stay the fuck off of me" is what Mark Denny will say, but we know what he means. So there's there's a lot of utility to that too. And then, as you said, the prying aspects, the knife saver aspects of it are awesome. And then when it comes to the dick pick, that's a little bit more of an aggressive. I mean, you can fight with this thing. That's this is a backup. Medieval daggers, particularly late medieval Renaissance daggers, didn't even have edges. They were point driven. And
they were pretty long too. This is only for a dick pick is pretty modest. It's 6.5 inches.
Well, we're not. Hey,
we are one day. We are going to make
50% are longer than 6.5 inches, from what I've been told. So, when it comes to something like that, especially for modern use, that's plenty. That's plenty of blade length or I don't know, shaft length, I guess, since we're talking about dick pick, to get the job done self-defense wise, or even in a military context, carrying something like that as your backup weapon. I mean, it's no joke. You're not worrying about having to sneak through plate armor or anything like that. That's going to that would probably punch through Kevlar. It would
probably gonna punch through this. One of our customers put it through a feral hog's head. He didn't kill the hog that way. He had previously freshly shot it, but he was like, I'm gonna test my dick pick on this thing. It's like
to go up against a feral hog with nothing but a dick pick.
That would be different. We have had, and that gets into like, do you remember the pork sickle? Do you remember that? We had a customer that wanted a tomahawk made for hog hunting. We made the thing for him. It was like, the spike. He wanted a double-edged spike that long,
right,
and an axe on the other side. Yeah. And I mean, he used it, and that was him and a few dogs on the hog. It was that style of hunting. It was like medieval hunting.
Yeah.
But I would rather use that than this. This would be.
But I mean, if you had to utilize a spike in a self-defense method, that's it's pretty good. The guy that had to use it against the dog, obviously it was a bad situation, but based on the injuries, the wounds that he sustained, and he had to
kill him. Yeah, he got him on the side of the neck, and then got him here, was pulling him to ground.
Yeah.
So he had to hold the dog, pull it, and stick it in the ribs several times.
It's not easy. I mean, accessing a weapon while something is doing damage to you, even in the context of a Dog Brothers match where like the damage is probably not going to be permanent, but if somebody's on top of you, pummeling you, having the presence of mind to find your tool, deploy the tool, and start to use it, without a bunch of training, that's saying a lot.
And it was weird because he was like a first time customer, couldn't get in on the dick pick batches, and contacted me and said, hey, I'm a Navy vet and this stuff. I never get in on these batches. Will you hold one for me? I had no incentive to do that. Actually, cost me time because I gotta like set one aside and send him an invoice and hope he pays it.
Right.
I did it anyway. I'm not sure why. And within a few days of getting it, he was practicing it and stuff. The dog attack happened. It was like crazy. So it's, there's weird stuff like that. So we do have those customer interactions that are like, anyway. Sorry, that was just one of those weird things where it was like, not only did he access it, but he only had it like for a few days, and then so not that he wouldn't have had something else on, but he didn't. He had that. just walking in his neighborhood and got mauled. So
it's funny how that
yeah.
kind of works out because, we were talking before, I've spoken to other people who have had students or people adjacent to them have to use their skill sets in real life. And one of my students, I won't blow up your spot, but you know who you are, motherfucker, has been all the way through the court process after having had to defend himself with the things that he's used, or, like tool that you made or whatever. Getting that feedback from a customer or a student is actually really important. And we live in a funny time where I can't say, I probably could because everything turned out okay in the end, but after months of court, police involvement, money being spent. So I don't want, I'm not going to give too much detail on the situation. And similarly with, other guys that I've talked to who have been like, oh yeah, when a guy that trains my style had to do this and it was in a lethal situation or whatever, getting that feedback as a either a teacher or a maker or whatever, it's good. You feel bad for the people that were involved on the other end of it, but only so much. You only feel so bad for that guy because you go, well, you brought ill intent and you ran up against something that was better than what your ill intent had. And
I don't feel bad for the dog for sure. It was
especially considering injuries. I've spent a chunk of my life working with working dogs, and they weren't police dogs or anything like that, but they were big hunting hounds that were not pet dogs that had potential to really, really mess stuff up. And I have a lot of respect for the ability. I've seen some things where one or two dogs, one dog versus one human, unless you run into a Malinois or like a huge cane corso or a Rhodesian that decides it's going to make a snack of you. There are some dogs that 1-to-1 are a problem, but once you get into two, you start to have a big problem really fast. And I've seen what happens when 3 English foxhounds go off on a deer, for example, and there's not much deer left pretty fast. Those are 80 to 100-pound dogs for the males, and the bitches that run a little smaller but are pretty feisty, and that's a problem real quick. And so someone getting savaged by a dog, like, I love dogs, man. The property I live on right now, there's 5 dogs here and they're all awesome. I have to allocate like an extra 5 minutes to leaving my house in the mornings if they're out there, because they all want to say hi, and I let them jump all over me. But there's 2 of them are boxers. One of them's a hound kind of thing. And then there's a Jack Russell. If all 5 of these dogs decided at the same time, like, they don't like me anymore, I'd have a big problem, So
and you look at like the special forces or the police, the dogs they use that are trained, of course, that's training. They don't weigh 80 pounds. And they can take you out. Yeah. And that's a lot. That's just training. But dogs, even medium sized, can get lucky. And,
once you
it's
get
crazy.
50 pounds of dog is where it starts to be a problem. 50 pounds of dog, especially an athletic one, you've got issues. So, I don't like to, I would almost rather hear about somebody having to stab up a person with a dick.
A bad guy than a dog, because we know mostly good dogs, but we get what bad people are.
Well,
and I'm not, I don't look at it as like marketing. I think I've talked about this before, that like in a way, because of your podcast being the nature of it, I'm okay with sharing that. But definitely in other contexts, no, because it's sort of like marketing on someone's really bad day. Like, that guy got screwed up by that dog. And he was fine with sharing, hospital pictures and stuff. And I'm just like, man, this guy got close to not making it. So, there've been other situations, and I'm sure as our business continues, in the years ahead, there probably will be, because of the mindset of our customers, there probably are going to be incidents where they get used against a person more than they have already. And so it's going to be one of those things that it goes in the vault. I think that's the phrase you'd used, like with Scott Babb. Not feeling comfortable marketing it. Like if I were in a situation and, I would have to make a personal decision after legal stuff settled, if I survived the situation, that sort of thing, whether I would be comfortable talking about publicly. That's like a personal choice. But, a customer, I'm not going to give the grisly details on that on social media. This is our special podcast,
Exactly.
It's a little bit different crowd here. I kind of joke on my YouTube channel that you're one of 12 special people that watch the video to the end. There really aren't, especially with the algorithm changing this, it's getting close to 12 people that watch the video. So hopefully more than that will watch this one though.
We'll get some views on this one. People have watched it a little bit. I would like hopefully we'll be leveling up on this season 2 from season 1, but yeah, man. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today and kind of giving a little bit of insight. I'm hoping in this second season to not just focus on martial artists, but I got a couple of makers, yourself, and I'm hoping maybe another guy who makes some cool shit is going to come on. I've got a couple of other martial arts guys, but also some mindset guys. I've got some things coming down the pipe that I'm really hoping can kind of just. So, I mean, we live in a wild and volatile world, and I think we had a few decades where we sort of were putting on the rose-colored glasses, and even though we were at war for a while in that period, I don't think that we were necessarily paying attention to what was going on at home. And I think that the United States is getting a little spicy.
I'd agree.
I don't see that stopping anytime soon. So when things get spicy, one thing that I would like to have on hand for sure, not to just keep pitching products at people, is a good force multiplier. And Tomahawk is up there, man.
It is sad to see what's going on, and that this isn't to get into politics or anything, but there doesn't seem to be an off-ramp for, I wouldn't call it madness or hysteria, but there's just, what's the word they use? Zeitgeist, is that the word? The general feeling. It's not a good one, the zeitgeist. It feels like you're watching like a Mad Max movie, the old one that was good, not the new one. But you're watching movies like that, like the dystopia movies that were like you thought were cool, like when you were a kid, and you're watching them now and you're like, I don't know if I want to be in this situation. Because you just absorbed it as a consumer of entertainment. Now you're like, when is this going to happen to me? Am I going to be a 75 or 80-year-old man that when society collapses or what? Hopefully not. I am an optimist. But I'm a pessimist about a lot of other bigger things that are outside of my control. But as far as the business goes, I'm an optimist. Tomahawks, the future of tomahawks is just beginning. It's perfect timing for all this cannabis legalization stuff when we get this lung ripper going. I don't smoke, by the way. But I'm very optimistic about the business. I really wish the best for our nation. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, exactly. I know that I'll be carrying tomahawks and you will too. And we got to wrap it up.
You got that right. And when you need a product tester for that lung ripper, I might be able to help you out with it.
I'll put you on the list of volunteers. It'll be the same one though, so you might want to clean it really good, before you.
We'll clean it real good. Anyway, man, well, thank you again for coming on here today. Thank everybody for watching. Keep an eye out. There's going to be new episodes rolling out probably around 1 week from here for maybe 10, 12 weeks. Maybe I'll stick a couple more rants in there as well as my interviews. And, as Crafty Dog says, the adventure continues. Thank you, everybody. And we'll catch you next time.
Yep. Good night. Be edgy.
Be edgy. All right. Here's the recording off.